Good morning. My name is Enrique Alvarez, and welcome everyone to another incredible episode of Logistics with Purpose, partnering with the supply chain now. And I have the pleasure to have a really good co-host as well. Adrian, how are you doing today? Good morning.
Good. Good morning, Enrique. Great to be with you. Doing well, and looking forward to having a great discussion here with Michael Jones.
I think we're going to have a great guest. I mean, we're very well aware of what he has done and what his organization's done, and it's going to be super interesting and fun. So I'm ready to start talking with him.
Yeah, great. So just want to introduce Michael Jones, the founder and CEO of Thrive Farmers, a local Atlanta company. We know have known Thrive Farmers for a number of years now. Met a number of their staff and become involved with them, and think the world of this organization. So Michael, thanks for making the time today. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
So just to get into your background a little, if you could start us off with just telling us where you grew up and your childhood overall.
Yeah, not all that exciting. I'm from a really small town in middle Georgia. My high school, I think, had 180 people total or something just over. I can remember from a pretty young age being excited to leave my small town and get to the big city. I think at some point New York was on my mind. I wound up making Atlanta my first stop, thinking that would be, on the way to New York, and never got there. But
what caught your attention? Well, what was it? What was Atlanta gave you?
It's funny. I don't know if I can pinpoint exactly when, but somewhere in my teenage years. So I grew up in a family business, car repair business, auto collision. And so as young as I can remember, I'm sanding cars and taping them up and painting them and doing, that kind of work, sweeping floors. And I just thought to myself, this isn't what I see myself, doing. And, I'd been 2 generations, but I would have been 3rd generation. But it just didn't excite me. And somewhere in my teenage years, my dad turned me on to Anthony Robbins as a self-help kind of guy. And I joke, because I grew up in the 80s, that between Anthony Robbins and Robin Leach, I had, my bookends. I had one guy telling me what, happiness and success looked like. And then I had another guy saying, you can do anything you want if you just set your mind to it. So that really influenced me heavily. I mean, I started to really dream big. I think I was already probably wired in a way to think like that, just based on other things that, were there from a young age. But that did start to point me, to leave my small town and to think bigger than maybe a lot of people around me. So yeah, I was called in those days, I was called a dreamer. They're like, oh, you got your head in the clouds, right, and you're always dreaming about something big.
So was your dad a little disappointed that you weren't staying in the family business, or did he to give you your wings?
No, my dad was an encourager. He was a Marine, Purple Heart Marine, had, left the small town as well and went around the world. He was a Vietnam veteran.
Wow.
And he's probably one of the most positive guys I've ever been around.
I'm
and
sure.
he was just like, you figure out your path and I'll support you no matter what. So right. I always had the encouragement to do absolutely whatever I wanted, no expectations at all, whether it was school, work, any of it.
Right. He sounds like an incredible father, and something that was very important, kind of like early on your career and your being an entrepreneur. Is there something that he kind of like constantly told you, any kind of piece of advice that you could share with the younger generations?
Well, yeah, my dad had a really high standard of excellence. I mean, he would tell me, if you're going to do something, do it right. And he just had not a lot of tolerance for, halfway doing something and doing it lackluster. He tended to be a bit of a perfectionist. His work ethic was, unbelievable. And he had worked in his family business from a very young age to really help support the family. He was the oldest of 6 siblings. So, very different time, some family background that just, was different and caused him to need to have to do that. But, I think I had the freedom to dream, but the expectation was, I don't care what you do. If you want to be a janitor and go sweep floors, that's fine if that fits your passion. But if you're going to do that, make sure you're the best at it. Just, or the best you're capable of. He didn't even think that, I had to be better than anybody else. It was just, I needed to live up to 100% of my potential, whatever that was. And so that was probably the one thing that I would say, was there. And from both parents really was just the support and freedom.
And the work ethic probably too, right? I mean, you're hard worker.
Exactly.
You've always worked really hard, and I'm guessing that you get that from them as well.
Yeah, I work hard at the things that I'm passionate about. Like even in school, I mean, I had a pretty wide range of grades. I'd have A's in the things that I enjoyed or cared about, and I would maybe barely get by in something like physics, where I felt like it didn't even make sense to me and I wasn't going to use it.
Right.
And so I just, I didn't spend a lot of time dreaming about physics when I was away from.
Not a lot of people can claim that.
That's right.
But so what was your favorite subject, and were there any kind of sports that you were passionate about growing up?
Yeah, so we, my brother and I raced motocross competitively. My dad, so very, very typical. My dad, I think we may have been 6, 7 years old. I've got one brother, he's 2 years younger, and we were given just, dirt bikes for Christmas one year, but more like trail bikes. And we started riding those and enjoying it. And so then my dad upgrades us to motocross bikes, and then he starts taking races. And before you know it, we're traveling around about a third of the United States at nationally sanctioned races with, kids that are sponsored by big teams. And my dad's he's our mechanic, and he's learning everything he can from people that he meets. And he's got our bikes functioning as private individuals, functioning similarly to these factory riders. And, and we were gone every weekend for about 6 to 7 years. We raced all over the place, and our circle of friends really became more our racing buddies. So we did motocross and we did football, and my dad was the coach of our teams, and just always really involved. He was going to be there to guide us. And he would, if he needed to go back and work until midnight, he would do it to be coach of our team from 4 o'clock until 6 in the evening,
Did he race bikes too, or he only
he did some. Yeah, he did some. He raced bikes a little bit before us, which is what got us into it. And then I think as we started to take off, he spent more time with us. Years later, he became a bodybuilder and wound up winning Mr. Georgia. And,
oh wow, really?
Wow,
he's 40 years old. And so
that is phenomenal. Just a super achiever.
He a super achiever, high standard of excellence. And so
absolutely. Wow.
I dare say that I've lived up to any of that. I think it's where I get my motivation from in certain ways, just seeing how well he did things.
What an inspiration. Yeah.
So
on getting back to the bike racing, the circuit. So were you gone pretty much Friday and you raced Saturday and then traveled back Sunday, or raced Saturday and Sunday?
Usually Saturday and Sunday. It depended on the weekend, and I can remember, I look at it more fondly now than I may have at the time every weekend, because there were a lot of times where friends were having birthday parties or other things
that
we'd miss because we were gone racing.
Yeah.
And it was for a season. The racing season, I forget what it was now, but it tended to be sort of right at the end of football season all the way through spring. So those two things kind of lived in harmony. We could do football and motocross. But for the motocross season, we were gone almost all the time.
Right. I don't know too much about the motocross circuit and that world. Have you seen it grow substantially over the years?
Yeah. It's huge. I still enjoy it. The Supercross that's on TV, it's actually going on right now. With all the pros, we knew some kids that we raced with that moved on up and went pro, and we were in some of those, circles for a while. And Yeah, I mean, it's like almost every other sport. The spectatorship has grown dramatically. The best riders now, they travel, on private jets to each location. They've got trucks that take all their mechanics, to the races overnight. And, the best guys make tens of millions of dollars in sponsorships. And, they're like, it's just like football, basketball, baseball,
Right. Yeah.
Did you
Probably,
and your brother ever try to go pro, or
No,
close
I don't
to
think
being that good? Or
neither one of us were really at the level probably to truly go pro. It's just like any other sport. The further up the ladder you get, there's truly just a small elite number. That's
the absolute elite. Yeah.
It is the elite of the elite. Yeah. So my brother was better than I was, but neither one of us were going to go pro. Sorry.
But to get to that point, you would have had to win, or place top 3 probably consistently right through most of the meets, I would think.
To get to pro, you need to be winning all of these national events. The kids that went pro were the ones that were winning those events constantly and clearly, right? They would just be out in front of everybody and just
dominating. Yeah.
Just dominating. And then those go pro. And then even some of those, the kids we knew that were like, everybody was in awe of, when they went pro, they might be middle of the pack. They weren't even the elite at the pro level. And so
to get to then the pros is a whole different ball game. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Just how competitive the world can be.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of other factors, right? Injury and, other crashes, and you can have everything going right and somebody runs into you and it makes you not finish a race and your points go down. And, at any given moment, there are 1,000 roadblocks ready to just, stop your progress, which as you look back, and I think about motocross and football, motocross, more of an individual sport, football, obviously a team sport. And I've got 3 boys now, and I talked to my wife from a really young age about the need for boys to develop grit. Grit is just this toughness and perseverance. It's a number of things kind of melded into one. But I think about my days racing, and playing football, and it gave me a resolve and this ability to persevere and to work through really tough moments, right? In football, sounds pretty bad, but you get your face kicked in. It's tough.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
But we're not
going to get back up again. Yeah.
Well, that's it. We're not doing our kids any favors if we shield them from every bad moment. Because guess what? Life's going to be tough.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
And so
No, go ahead. Sorry, Michael.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
No, just we totally agree. I think that it's definitely important. I think something that we need to kind of encourage even more these days, because I somewhat think that it's kind of being lost sometimes. But it's a key life lesson, right? Making mistakes, struggling, taking challenges head on. Tell us, so now going a little bit more into your professional career, how did you kind of started shaping the professional career that kind of led you to where you are?
So as I'm nearing the end of high school, I'm starting to get ideas about, how can I make money? And I had a family, working in the family business. I had somebody that worked for the business who was related to an owner of an exotic car dealership up in the Midwest. And he knew I was a car guy and that I liked cars. And, he had a Corvette at the time, and his cousin actually owned a Lamborghini dealership and had, those kinds of cars. And so he said, my cousin's looking for certain cars and is paying finder's fees. And I've been trying to help him find certain vehicles. And so I said, so if you think I found some cars, I could get a finder's fee. And he said, I'm sure. And I said, well, give me a list of some of the cars you're looking for. And so I started going into there was no internet at the time. So I'm going into the classified ads in Atlanta, which is the nearest big city. And I'm looking at, cars for sale that would seem to be in an exotic kind of category, right? Expensive cars. And I assumed that people that own those cars know other people that own those cars. So I just started picking up the phone and calling and networking and saying, hey, do you know anybody that has a so-and-so? And I've got somebody looking to buy one of those, because I was the finder's fee was like $2,500 or something. I can't remember it now. Maybe, it was about what it would take me, 9 months to make.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great
sweeping
high school, yeah.
for
That's
$5
big money.
an hour. And so anyway, that turned me on to this idea. So I can't even remember the details exactly at this point, but I connected with somebody, through about 3 or 4 phone calls, and found one of the vehicles and got paid a fee. And I saw that work. And so all it took was, that connection to success to go, wow, okay. If I just persevere through these phone calls enough, I'll eventually get to a place where there's a payoff.
Right. You can join the dots. Yeah.
That's right. And so, so I wound up, doing that. And I said earlier, I was a dreamer. I was called a dreamer. Well, I did this and I started, getting ideas, and I thought, well, now maybe at some point I could, start a dealership and start, doing this with cars that I love and whatever. And so I wound up doing that for about a year, just as I'm coming out of high school, and I started in a small junior college. My parents had divorced as I was graduating high school, and the money was really not there for me to go off to school like so many of my friends, to big colleges and have the campus experience. And it just wasn't in the cards for me. So I was driving back and forth to a small college. And frankly, I got pretty bored pretty quickly. I wasn't interested in the material being talked about in class. I was sitting here thinking about how could I sell the next car. And so anyway, I chased that for about a year. I wound up dropping out of that college, thinking I had an opportunity with a guy I'd met in that business to potentially get a factory authorized Ferrari dealership. And we had a whole story, and we put together a business plan. And so here I am, 18 years old, putting together a business plan that I had no idea. I had to just use common sense to figure out what, might be possible. And, story for another day. It wasn't meant to be, and it wasn't going to happen. But I learned, and from there I jumped to another business opportunity, and acquired some debt in the process of both of those. My mom had loaned me some money during the car phase, and then once more for this new venture, and neither one of them worked out. But I had this debt to repay now, and so that sent me on another course. I wound up moving to Atlanta, taking a job as a stockbroker trainee, had somebody that agreed to teach me the business. And I did. I worked in that business for about 5 years, did a number of different things. And I feel like that's where I started to learn a lot more. I learned about, trading stocks. I learned about sales. Being a stockbroker was predominantly about selling. You'd have to develop a talk track, and you're working the phones. And so, I'm making a lot of calls every day and doing cold calling. And it's where I believe I started to develop real life skills. I'd gotten some good experience trying these two businesses, and kind of learned quickly, how hard it was to make a business work. But I added to that now with, real sales skills, some I would say mentors, maybe not in a good way, but some mentors that modeled things that I realized I don't want to be like that. And I was just talking to my oldest son last week and said that, you've got 2 opportunities when it comes to mentorship. You can find mentors that model things that you want to be like, and like, I admire this guy and I want to be more like that. What can I learn from him? I said, but the first 8 or 10 years of my professional career, I would say I had the other kind of mentors that modeled behaviors and decision making that I didn't want to be like.
Wow.
And both are important, right?
Yeah.
That's a very good take on the whole concept of mentorship, right? Because I feel like we also kind of just seek out to those individuals that we really admire, and then can give you some positive
right, exactly,
reinforcement. Yeah. But you're right. If you pay attention, you can learn probably as much, if not more, from people that actually you don't agree with, and people that that's a really
that's actually very refreshing. I haven't heard that being verbalized like that before. Yeah,
Well,
very, very refreshing.
I'll
Which
tell you, I
is
think,
very timely as well, right? Because we feel like we're kind of like just breaking apart and we're constantly dividing us. Like, listen, we can learn from both. I mean, you can
absolutely.
learn from a bad role model as much as you can from a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the biggest challenges that I see in people is self-awareness, right? We all have blind spots, so just human nature. We're never going to see ourselves exactly the way other people perceive us. But the more self-aware we can be, I think the more successful we ultimately can navigate our day-to-day professional lives.
Right.
And oh, by the way, our personal lives, my marriage.
Right. Exactly.
And
So, yeah.
So I think that, when I look back at some of these experiences of people that just engaged in things that I was definitely wanting to avoid, that made me more introspective. Like, okay, is there anything that I'm doing that looks like that? And so I believe that can help heighten your self-awareness, which is just a really valuable tool. So
Absolutely. So Michael, tell us about the path then from stockbroker to starting Thrive Farmers. What was that like?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a jump there, but I'll make that one short. So I did spend a few years, and after seeing some things, these guys were making the kind of money that I wanted to make.
Right.
However, they were doing things that were, not okay by me, just as it related to putting self before others.
Yeah.
And so I decided to leave. I made a jump to a small healthcare company that needed to raise some capital and needed to shore up operations to expand. That was kind of a step, a very brief step on the way to starting my next real business, which was a healthcare services business. Won't go into the details of that, but it was investor backed. I had a couple of people that wanted to back me in that business. We, had a really big vision as to what we thought was possible. But Medicare reimbursement seesawed up and down and ultimately put us out of business. We had a non-invasive therapy that was just never going to be frontline in terms of replacing other more mainstream treatments. So after 5 years of running that business, I realized that it was not going to scale at a level to support me and a staff and growth. And so even though we left the clinic itself in operation, I went to go do other things. And I had also gotten married during that time, and then my marriage failed. I was not mature enough for marriage. I was very self-focused. I was only really interested in how to grow my business. And I look back now, and I mean, I was woefully unfair. There's always, much more to the story, but I just, I was 30 years old, and I was at a crossroads where this business that I had, which frankly did have the potential to scale very large. And my dream for it was, big, and it coincided with the dreams of my childhood. I wanted to have a certain net worth by the time I was 30. I wanted to be on certain lists and have certain accomplishments and feel like I had made something of myself. Because at that time, I thought the measure of a man had to do with what I had accomplished professionally. And what you had. Goes back to that whole Robin Leach analogy, right?
Right.
Watching Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and I'm like, oh, well.
Comparing yourself to that. Yeah.
That's right. If you're successful, then obviously you're rich, and it means you've got these things. And so I was just, my compass was off, and this didn't come from family. I didn't grow up in a wealthy family by any means. It just came from, this message that was coming out of media, right? At the time, I was listening to the wrong messages. And so, so at a crossroads of 30, I was really at a dead end. I had a concept that I had ginned up with my dad to do kind of a consolidation and roll up in that collision industry. Had a lot of reasons to think that was going to go well. We had funding committed from some pretty big entities. The dot-com bust happened, and the funding just got pulled out from under us just before closing, literally like 2 weeks before closing.
Wow.
And I had a new girlfriend, and we had bought a house, and we're living together. And all of a sudden, some things were blowing up and not going well there. And but you know, when you've got a girlfriend and you buy a house together, it's not easy just to kind of break up and go your own ways, right?
A little more involved.
A lot more involved, right? And we had a dog. So he had a house and a dog. And so I'll just say that I was pretty broken at that point. I had all these big hopes and dreams, and almost nothing that I had planned was working out the way I thought, not even close. You know, what happened in my personal life really changed everything and led to Thrive being created. You know, I did not grow up in a household of faith. We never really talked about it. It wasn't a thing. I didn't think about, is there a God? And, you know, we had just no reference points. But my girlfriend at the time was working in a church in Midtown Atlanta in the nursery on Sundays. And she said, hey, why don't we go and visit this church where I've been working next Sunday, and I'll mark off and not work. And so I didn't really, I said, well, I guess I don't know what that's going to do, but sure. I didn't have any other answers. And I thought, why not?
Yeah.
And, you know, also another story for maybe another time, but that was the beginning of an incredible change in my life and my understanding of, you know, what my life could be about and what matters and why. And so we wound up, so I can say now that the full story is she's my wife of 20 years now, the mother of my 3 boys.
Wonderful.
Things completely changed for both of us as we began a faith journey together, and really recentering why we're here and what's going to matter about our lives. And it started me asking the question, like, and I think too, right, at 30 versus, you know, at 16, cars are the coolest thing ever, right? But right. At 30, I still appreciated, you know, cool cars. It's not that they're not cool, but I certainly began to wrestle with and realize that that's not what life is made of. It certainly doesn't make you somebody. And I started to wrestle with, you know, I didn't have anybody close to me die yet, but I certainly had started to learn of people who passed away and realized, hey, we're not promised tomorrow. We go through making our plans, but for any host of reasons, today could be my last day. And again, you don't think about that as a teenager, but as you start to get older, you realize that I'm not guaranteed any certain amount of time. And if tomorrow is my day, what is my life going to have counted for? I mean, where I live or how big my house is or what cars I own, those really aren't going to matter. I'm looking at my kids and what kind of citizens are my kids and what's my legacy and what have I left in this world? And oh, by the way, is any of that going to matter in the next life? And we all have to wrestle with that. Really, no matter what your faith is or is not, you still have to wrestle with that.
Think about that, exactly.
Yeah. And so that really started me looking deeper in my heart. Now, what I realized is that we were made in such a way that material things in this world can't fill the hole in our heart. We have a purpose that drives us. And until we find that purpose, we're going to keep spinning, right? We're going to keep looking for something that gives us meaning. And somewhere about this time, I started another company. It was another healthcare company, but it was meant to manage costs around high dollar implants. So hips, knees, pacemakers, defibrillators. Think of all the different implantable devices that are really expensive in the medical world. And we had been working with certain factions and for a couple of years part-time. And then we saw an entry point. I had a couple of guys that were working with me on this business. And we saw an entry point to make it into a full-time real business every day. And we did. And our timing was just really good. And that company started to really grow. We, I think we did about 700,000 in revenue between August and December 31st of that partial year in
What year are you? 04? That's all right.
That was 04. Yeah. And the next year, the first full year we had in business, we did 3.8 million.
Nice.
The next year was like 9 million. And then I think it was like 12 or 14 and then 19 million. So our growth curve just did this. And we started paying out, big distributions to those of us that were owners literally after 6 months. So, the company growth is going high. My income is really for the first time getting up there. And I'm starting to realize some of these, prior dreams of my childhood. And for a moment, I'm starting to think like, oh, this is really interesting. I'm now, walking in this way, and fortune and, prosperity are coming my way. And I'm thinking of this exchange like, okay, as long as I'm generous and I'm giving some portion of what I make, this is a pretty good exchange. I can do that all day long. And so for a little while, I thought this was the method, right? Is it, I'm going to be faithful with what I've been given here in this opportunity, and I'm going to give away a certain amount of whatever I make, and be a generous person. But I continued to sort of, pursue my faith journey, dig deeper for, questions, for answers to questions that I had. And in 2008, one of my dreams from 20 years prior had been, I want to found a company that is on the Inc. 500 list, the 500 fastest growing companies in America.
Right.
I think I had just read a magazine when they came out, and I was like, oh, that'd be cool. I want to be on that list.
I want that.
Yeah. So I claimed it. Right. And, but in 2008, that happened. And I remember it was in August when they published the magazine with the list. And we had known about it for a little while and had to be quiet. But when that finally happened, it was kind of exciting, like for the day that it happened. But I remember how quickly the excitement wore off, and I couldn't hang on to it. And I remember just sitting at home in my living room with just sobbing, with tears coming down, thinking, is this all there is? I spent 20 years dreaming of this moment, and I couldn't hang on to it for even a day or two.
Right.
And I just thought, wow. And the thought was, okay, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to dream of something and put such energy and effort into something that is that hollow when I get there. And so I remember asking God for clarity on what really matters to you. And so for a couple of years thereafter, we had, some other things happen. Big Silicon Valley private equity firms, Sequoia Capital, kind of world famous. They came in and invested in our company. It was the first investment in the Southeastern US in over 10 years. So, we're on the cover of publications and, a lot of flux of phone calls. But I remember looking at that like, okay, what is this going to mean? And about a year after they came in, I realized it was, my time to go. And, there's a whole backstory to that, obviously, that I won't get into today. But it was very clear at that moment that chapter for me was closing, and it was time for me to really search deep and move into a place of purpose. And so I went on sabbatical, an intentional sabbatical, to say what's going to be next and what is going to matter about my life.
Seeking that self-awareness that you were mentioning before, right? Kind of coming full circle to like, who are you and why are you here in this world? Kind of.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's incredible. To go ahead, Michael.
Well, I was going to say, I don't want to just drone on, but that briefly, that'll segue into, I went on this sabbatical period. My boys were 5, 3, and 1 at the time. And so my wife had me commit to at least 6 months before I really, truly started anything else, and longer if I could stand it. But literally about 2-3 weeks in, I went from my prior company having 60, 70 direct reports, and, travel and all the responsibilities of that, running operations, technology, and marketing. to waking up, a next day, not even going into the office.
Nothing on the agenda. Yeah.
Nothing, no calendar, no agenda. And it was weird, really weird.
Well, you've been a serial entrepreneur your whole life, from cars to motorcycles to stock market. I mean, it sounds like you need to be doing something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I underestimated how hard it was going to be, because at first I'm like,
oh, I can do
this. Is going to be awesome.
This is going to be great. Yeah.
Yeah. No meetings, no phone calls, no responsibilities. And, but, a couple of weeks in, it was clear that I need something to keep my mind occupied. And I did have a really good friend who had invited me to a conference like 2 days after I left here in Atlanta called Plywood People, Jeff Schinnebarger.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
We actually attended that last year.
Yeah, so this is going back to, I think it was the first or second year Jeff had done Plywood People. There were maybe about 60 people in attendance.
Amazing conferences, by the way, for whoever is listening to this interview with you. I strongly recommend it for anyone that listens and has kind of like a similar spirit when it comes to purpose and business and finding the why of your life, if you will.
Yeah, that's right. I do too, because Jeff was a gift in my life at the time. He was one of multiple inputs who just raised this notion of, your work having purpose, which in 2011 was not something being talked about in many places. And, my friend Greg, who invited me, had met Jeff and knew about it. And so I was wrestling with kind of the concept, but I'm not sure I knew what to do about it. And then I go to the first plywood conference where there are others wrestling with the same thing and kind of starting to take this, wide idea and put a little bit more of a box around it and say, take your work that you do every day and make it count for something. And so as I'm wrestling with that, that was just a very timely, informative opportunity to push me in a direction. And I had an executive coach that at that point, I think I'd had maybe 3 or 4 years, but somebody that had run companies and was just really a wise voice of advice and guidance at a really critical time, who helped me, compartmentalize and walk through some of the pros and cons of what I'd learned over my journey. And so as I'm doing that, I decided, my wife's English, but she grew up in Jamaica and her dad's a coffee farmer. And I had just at Christmas, because this is late January of 2011, maybe into February now, but at Christmas, I had just been talking to him about, the coffee value chain and trying to help make sense of it. And, in Jamaica, like in every other country, there are units of measure that are not standardized. There's some box that has a localized name that has, a certain amount of coffee cherries in it. And these farmers get paid a certain amount based on what's in that box. So it's consistent. They know what the box looks like and even what it measures, but it definitely doesn't equate to pounds of roasted coffee.
To the yield. Exactly right.
That's exactly right. So you have to do a lot of work, and most farmers don't know. They are used to selling that raw product, and they lose ownership and transparency after that point. So it was really hard when I'm talking to my father-in-law, because he just didn't have visibility in the supply chain beyond what he did, and no sense of what he was doing in comparison to, he grows Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee, the high altitude coffee that's worth $80 a pound in Japan. And so I had met a guy in Costa Rica that had been a lawyer and retired to Costa Rica to raise his foster kids. He bought a coffee farm really as a hobby, no other reason. And he had some real estate here in Atlanta that he was going to, develop, sell, and get income from over the years. But the big 2008 bust changed his plans. And so in 2011, when I met him, he was a couple of years into trying to figure out how to make a living on this coffee farm he bought, because he didn't want to move back to the US and start over. And so he had enough knowledge to help me and my father-in-law figure out, how to transfer it into pounds. And we ultimately figured out, all right, he's making about $4 a pound on something that sells for 80 in Japan. So there's a big gap.
Right.
Wow.
But Jamaican politics are quite complex. There's a lot of government intervention,
Right.
and taxation, shockingly, in the levels before it leaves the country. So it's harder than one might think. But what I also learned is that he's getting paid better than most farmers, because in Costa Rica, for example, where Ken lives, a lot of farmers were averaging, $1.50 a pound or $1.75 a pound, and not much above the cost of production. It's only because my father-in-law's coffee has such value somewhere else that he could get the $4 and make a decent living on the yield that he had. But that opened the door for me. And as I started wrestling with it, it started, lining up with my prayer of, all right, what's something that matters that I could go do? And what I learned, I went to Costa Rica. After that, I said, okay, I need to just go walk the ground. So I went to Costa Rica and spent a week and walked farms and talked to farmers. And because everything I'd been reading here talked about climate change. The problem in coffee was climate change. And so I'm expecting to go hear how all these farmers, their plants keep dying off because of climate or something, and they can't keep. But that wasn't what I learned at all. The real toxic issue was lack of ability to predict or control pricing, and them needing to basically sell every coffee bean they could produce to get every penny they could to try to survive another year. And I just thought, okay, this is interesting. And so I started to step back and I looked at all these parallels from my medical device company. And I thought, okay, these are both $100 billion industries. Both of them have very fragmented, disjointed supply chains that lack transparency from one layer to the next. And in both instances, the people that actually know what's wrong are the ones inside the industry who benefit from it staying the way it is, not changing it. So nobody is going to disrupt themselves.
Right.
Right.
And so I started thinking, this needs to be fixed. This isn't okay. Farmers need to be able to, coffee is more valuable and in more demand than it has ever been at any point in history. Yet the farmer can't even make a living, and they're dropping out every year by double digits. So at some point, there's nobody left to grow coffee because there's no money to be made. Aside from the fact that you've got families that just can't even support their farmers that can't support their families. And so I say that at that point, my heart was broken for that issue. And I realized.
Quick question on that regards, because for people that don't probably understand coffee the way you do, and me included on that list, because there's only once a year, right? Harvest is once a year, and you have to kind of just hedge the whole volatility of the whole year. And you get a wrong year, then you're basically screwed for that year, and you have to start over again next year. Tell us just very briefly, tactically, like what is the kind of components of that supply chain that you just briefly described, and what are the price drivers? Because you or anyone in the US or the Western world, if you're paying 1 point whatever for coffee, for a pound of coffee, but then you go to Starbucks and buy your coffee for, it's just, there's a huge discrepancy there. You're absolutely right. You probably see it more clearly because you know how much they're charging you for the coffee every day.
Yeah, that's right. There's two components. There's the cost of production. So there are all the things that a farmer has to do to create, to grow the coffee, right? And by and large, there are, inputs and other expenses they incur on an annual basis. And then there's, equipment and land and the other things that kind of, get amortized over a longer period of time. And those two things together, equate to the true cost of growing coffee. And those don't really vary much year over year. As a matter of fact, they really just kind of creep up over time, right? But the price that a farmer gets paid is very volatile. In coffee especially, we ultimately found this is true for almost every agricultural product, for cocoa, for tea, for, you name it, anything that's grown a far distance away from where it's consumed. But in coffee, there is a tradable index, and that index is associated with what's called commodity grade coffee. So it's really kind of low quality. A lot of it would be ingredients or just, really low quality production level coffee. There's a smaller percentage of coffee, maybe 10 or 20%, that's called specialty grade, which is what, a lot of your coffee shops are going to provide. And then there's some big brands that'll have a mixture of the two. They'll be kind of on the edge, maybe not all the way down at the bottom of the barrel, but they don't truly live at the top quality either. And so that index fluctuates, and depending on sort of the region and the quality, there might be differentials. So if the commodity index is at $1.75, certain quality coffees, maybe, 10 cents over, maybe 20 cents over. So there are all those factors, but in general, the revenue that a farm can get is going to fluctuate based on what that index does. And I went into it with my financial services background, thinking that these farmers probably are selling futures at the beginning of the season to get money to buy all their fertilizers and pay for labor. And then they just have to deliver against that when the coffee comes in, right? So they're kind of already fixed. That was the way my brain was working. And it really couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, very little, if any, farmers are selling futures. They're borrowing money from local intermediaries who are, charging very high interest rates. There's different names associated with those. And, it's high risk. And so after, operating businesses for a long time, I get it. If you're not a good business risk and there's a lot of variables, how do any of us offset risk? It's with margin. So they charge more. But it's just this vicious cycle where a farmer's having to borrow money at different stages for fertilizer and for other things, for big labor when they go to pick the coffee. And then it's months later when the coffee is ready to be sold that farm knows what they're going to get paid for their coffee.
Right.
And
so
it's
the layout up front. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's almost like this big gambling thing, right? Where you're already committed before you really know what you're going to get paid. And when that time of year comes, this is the way 99% of farms work. Some of them, are able to get a little bit more predictability over pricing, but it doesn't stay. So there are versions of volatility, but all of them live in a pretty wide risk corridor. And so when I went in, I just thought, well, coffee at the end point is stable, right? There's not an electronic sign on the shelf for a 12-ounce bag of coffee that changes during the day, right? I mean, it's $12 for a bag of coffee today, next week, at Christmas. You may get coupons every once in a while, but the price of coffee is fixed. If you go into a store and you buy a cup of coffee, that price is fixed. So it just occurred to me, if coffee is fixed at that end, can we not find a way to have the farmer participate in the stability of that price? And of course, initially I kept having people say, well, you can't do that and that won't work. So I kept saying, okay, then why? And I could never get any really good reasons as to why it wouldn't work. It was just, that's never going to work. And I don't know, I'm a little defiant. I'm very much a nonconformist. I can't stand people saying that, just do what you're told, just shut up and do what you're told, ask questions, right? That goes against my nature. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to challenge it. And I'm going to find out, is there, a real substantial reason that we can't change the way this is being done? And and Ken, the guy that I met, the way he was surviving at the time, he cut out all of the other layers. He didn't sell his coffee to the local co-op for it to disappear. He was roasting his own coffee, bagging his own coffee, and selling it to tourists at full retail. And in doing that, he ran out of coffee. He sold the little bit that he could produce. So he started inviting other farmers in and said, hey, I'll show you my books and I'll do all the work, but I'll give you X% of the profits at the end. And so I thought, well, that's not going to scale gracefully. You can do that in a small town with your two local neighbors. But conceptually, what if we change that, turn that around a little bit, and let's create a revenue sharing model initially on consignment because we didn't have the capital to go pay for coffee. But let's see if we can use the existing rails. Let's use all the existing players, because we're not going to go build our own supply chain. But if we can aggregate volume and de-risk the supply chain so that the providers that do things that are necessary along the way don't have any risk,
Right.
They become a fee-for-service provider. We bring them more volume and we get a better price as a result. And they actually just provide that one service. And so by doing that, we squeezed the balloon, and we figured out that all those costs in the middle had so much risk that the real cost of the service was a lot less if we took away the risk.
Right.
And so we go to the end customer and say, we want to bring the farmer into partnership. We've got a model that's going to have a revenue share. The farmer gets a predetermined fixed percentage of whatever price you pay us, and they know in advance what that is. And then we're going to add value. We're going to do all these things in the middle. We're going to coordinate everything. We're going to build a brand story around that so people know that this is worth getting behind. And you can benefit from telling that story, and the farmer benefits from your stable price. And so that was really the genesis of how we decided to reinvent the supply chain in coffee. But I knew for that to matter, it had to be done at scale. If we only sell, 400 pounds of coffee, that's not going to make a big impact. And, I've been a big dreamer, but what I figured out is that the difference in a dreamer and a visionary has to do with, your motivation and your execution. So once you figure out how to really execute on it, you're not a dreamer anymore, right? You can actually make something happen. And that's what we wanted to do here. We wanted to find out, how can we move containers and tens of containers and hundreds of containers of coffee, millions of pounds. And we had to partner with people that were already used to doing that and just change the way they think about it. And so as we go start telling that story, even the big guys, right? We sometimes think that, it's just a small farmer that needs help, but even the big guys are struggling with other dynamics. And so what we came to realize is that our new way of thinking was bringing hope to small farmers, medium farmers, and even the big guys. And everybody that we talked to at the time in the supply chain wanted to participate and help support this new way of thinking. And that allowed us then to put a foot in the ground and say, we're going to do this and we're going to start and go forward.
This has been an incredible conversation. It's not only been
so
a
interesting.
great experience share on your part, but it's been like a finance lesson, an accounting lesson, a strategy lesson. It's been like so much more. And
let me tell you, those lessons.
Yeah, go ahead.
Those lessons were all much harder learned going through them than I just made it sound like.
Yeah, than you just elaborated on, I'm sure.
But it sounds like you've been used to that, right? I mean, you kind of like face problems head on, and you failed many, many times. So it's kind of one of those things that maybe people this day see you and say, hey, that's the overnight success. I'm like, yeah, over like a matter of how many businesses that failed, like
overnight success only took 30 years to get there.
Right, right. But could you share a bit more of the volume and impact that you're having? We'll switch a little bit more now towards the actual organization. But when you say how big is it? I mean, you needed the volume. You started with 1 or 2 containers, and how did it scale up from there?
Yeah, we did. We started with, I think, actually 6 or 7 containers.
Wow.
We had to change some things about the model. We started early on, as I mentioned, on consignment, and we realized that put way too much pressure on the farms, even though we were encouraging people to give a small percentage of their overall and consider it more like a savings account. Things are so tight that even small amounts put pressure. So we had to figure out financing and how to advance money, and then come back with a second or third payment, and how to reconcile. But in the first, year or two, it was really tight. I mean, I was funding it out of pocket from savings that I had in my last venture. I didn't immediately have the ability to attract investors. A lot of people did well in my last venture, and I thought I would be able to, but hear this vision of, hey, I'm going to change the world of coffee. The excuses start to mount up like, whoa, I don't know if I want to be part of that. So, so it took a little while, and I had to go further and deeper than I thought, in my own, stash. And we were really bootstrapping it. I mean, that first year, we weren't sure if we could sell. We had sourced what we later learned was a lot of coffee.
When did you start it? What was the first year of Thrive?
2011 was the first year.
11 was the first year.
Yeah.
Those containers departed from.
That's right. January departed.
Jamaica or Costa Rica, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we didn't ever source from Jamaica. It was Costa Rica, Guatemala, and ultimately Honduras. We had a lot of challenges in Honduras. We ultimately had to pull out in the second year. We've been looking for an entry point to go back in, but since then it's been Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, and then Brazil and Colombia, which are both in the Southern Hemisphere and have 2 seasons, one major, one minor. And then a little bit in Africa. But we started with maybe 6 or 7 containers the first year, maybe went to 8 or 9 the second year. We're extremely fortunate to be able to sell those in that first year, because for a startup company with no sales distribution channels, that was a lot of coffee. And so there were definitely miracles and blessings all over that early period for us to have a shot at moving what we did. But it was, going into that second full year that we got introduced to Chick-fil-A, and they had been running a process, and we ultimately prevailed in becoming their partner chain wide. And so we went from, and this is where, the structure, that initial structure of a vision of scale, right? We had selected partners that if that moment came, we knew we had the ability to scale up, and they engaged with us. And it's funny, we had a couple of guys, one in Guatemala particularly, that said, that moment is going to come for you, and we're going to be ready, but what you're doing has to happen. And this is a family that had been in coffee for over 100 years and truly one of the captains of industry, but they said, our industry won't survive without you doing what you're doing. And so we're going to be part of this. And they actually came up and sat at the table with Chick-fil-A when we had our initial supply chain meetings. And we were told when we started, you got 3 gates with Chick-fil-A to get through: supply chain, culinary, and marketing. But supply chain is first. And if you don't get a green light, then you don't go. There's no need.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah. And so we spent a couple of weeks planning. We were a small, scrappy company, right? About 5 employees, only a couple of years in business, calendar years, not even full years operating yet. I had the benefit of, my background and having scaled a successful business. And we had, a structure that made sense. And then we had partners at the table that were vouched for what we were doing. And I'll say that, some divine intervention had to be somewhere around that table too, because it just didn't make sense otherwise. It's just, how did Chick-fil-A put their trust in a new little idea like ours? So we really do feel like there was just something, divine and spectacular about that moment. It was special. But, we never took it for granted. We had an incredible meeting with supply chain. We had presentation materials and whiteboards, and we really walked through it thoroughly. And they said, we're confident that you can do this. And this is who we want to be as a company. We want our purchasing power to do good in the world. And we've been looking for an opportunity like this, and we are going to walk forward together. And we view this as a marriage, and whatever bumps we encounter together. So we want you to know that we're with you.
That's incredible.
And I got to tell you that's
great.
That's a real partnership
on the Chick-fil-A side as well, right? I mean, because they took a chance on a smaller company, and
that's right.
And this was towards what, the end of 2012, Michael?
This would have been 13. Yeah.
2013 now. Yeah. Okay.
Approaching mid 2013.
Right.
But, as a guy that had my whole life savings on the line and my family at risk, to have that moment occur after, if you think about my journey, right, as I described it, so many things not working out, and then things seemingly working out, but not really feeling all that significant. Right. And then I'm at a point where I decide, I don't know how big or small it's going to be, but whatever, from here forward, I want my life to just matter. And I want to know that I'm doing something that is really having a positive impact in the world. Yeah. And then you get a company like Chick-fil-A that I think just does so many things so well.
Right.
And has such a great business and history, and they come in and say, we believe in you, and by the way, we're going to stand by you, and we're not going to run for the hills if we have a tough moment. And there've been a couple of tough moments, nothing that I would be able to share here, but just, in business, those things happen.
Right.
And they have always been true to their word. They're the kind of people that, treat you the way you would want to be treated, even when you're not in the room.
Right.
So for us,
that says everything. Yeah.
Yeah. For us to be able to build our business with that kind of a partner, will have ramifications in families around the world for generations to come. And that, when I think about the things that I used to dream of and thinking that, if I can just be on this list or get this thing, that's going to feel, significant. I realized, no. What I just said a moment ago, that's where real significance is going to come from, that there's something that we can do with our lives all day, every day, that will have ramifications around the world for generations to come. And so, there's other arms that you guys have met with Mike Menina, who heads up our nonprofit foundation. I always had a vision that, that a for-profit business could make a profit and still do good in the world. You don't have to choose one or the other. So we're unashamedly for profit, but that we could take some of we could choose to take some of those profits and invest them in an entity that can go further and deeper in the communities where we operate. And we can help build up the leaders of tomorrow. We can help create solutions to problems or bring resources to bear to create solutions to problems that they face.
Right.
We believe that we can help, solve some root causes that we all deal with. And so we've tried to take our business and look at it holistically and say, how can we do business differently, day by day? And then with the relationships and the trust we've developed, what else can we do with that? And so ThriveWorks is, one example of that on the nonprofit side. And I've got an innovative mindset. I'm very, I love to think creatively and innovatively. And so when I get to do that through the lens of our business, it starts to reach into products and services and, this really long runway of opportunity that we see to do this around the world and in different ways and with partners. And so,
and it's been from there to changing communities, right? I mean, I know, and I've actually talked to Mike Menina and some other people on your team, and what you're doing through your vision and your strategy and just this sheer purpose-driven mentality that your businesses have, I think that you're just really changing the life of a lot of people. Like you building schools and you're helping people get better education, and
that's right,
even
clean water,
soccer field and basketball fields, and just you're really trying to develop these communities in Nicaragua to the point. And this is, by the way, we will probably have to schedule another conversation because we're totally out of time here, but it's been so incredibly
we will.
But at some point, even to the point that you said, and that the immigration problem that we have in the US, it's entirely linked to this same issue with coffee. If we were to pay better rates for their coffee, people wouldn't have to go through all that incredibly adventure that in a bad way that kind of entails to go from your country, leave everything behind, and just start walking towards the north, trying to look for a better life. It's just, if people really understood what you had already explained to us so clearly, and your business model has proven to everyone, we could stop one of the biggest problems that the world has, right? Like just immigration.
Well, you touched on that. We're extremely passionate about it because I've got a conviction. I call it no toxic charity. I want to be helpful, but I want to do it in a way that's productive and sustainable. No Band-Aid programs, no enabling. I want to look for root solutions, right? Root causes, root solutions. And so when we go into a community and we're able to, systemically pay a livable wage for coffee, do it with a partner that gets what we're doing and why, and is willing to support that and communicate that to their customers, and stand behind it for years on end. Not just, hey, this is good for marketing this year and then next year something else. It's like, wholly committed. And so now we can all think long term, and we do have the ability to completely change the dynamic as it relates to what, immigration. People don't have a need to leave because they don't want to leave. Trust me, I've sat around tables,
Right.
and I can tell you about conversations. These men do not want to leave their families and go have to look for work in the US. But the options locally just don't exist. And so they're forced to do it.
Michael, talk about programs, and Enrique, I know you said we're running out of time, but you launched ThriveWorks Labs last July. I saw. Can you tell us the thought process behind starting that and how that's looking now, 6-7 months later?
Yeah, it's still quite early. And that was really, credit goes to Mike Menina. We're fortunate to have somebody with his skill set and experience and talents to lead an organization. I birthed a vision for what I wanted us to focus on as it relates to leadership development, and, community involvement in programs and things that we could help, maybe coach and assist forward, through what became ThriveWorks. But Mike, about a year and a half ago, started to have, other ideas as to how could a nonprofit function in these communities and bring different types of innovation. And he had somebody that came on as a fellow who was extraordinarily bright, and talking through ideas. And so this idea of ThriveWorks, the labs was birthed, where, what ThriveWorks does every day really is enhances our business model relationship, right? It's just an accelerator of the relationships that we have through our business model, this idea of commerce, where, we provide something of value, but so does the farmer, and we both benefit from it. But Labs is really charged with, thought leadership and innovation. What are things that can go further, right? Does it have to do with other things going on in the world that could then be brought into, and add value to these communities and these farming families? So they're very early in the incubation stage, I would say, but the premise is to incubate ideas that will accelerate and go further than just the Thrive Farmers model. Because what we really care about are the communities, right? The people, as it relates to the Thrive model. Now, we talk so much about the farmers. We've also learned that we have to be very vocal at saying, hey, our own team members are as important as our farmers. We can't, leave our team behind and just focus on farmers. So I want to be careful that, we care about all people, our team internally, vendors and partners that we do business with, customers, clients, out in the world, whether we buy from them or they buy from us, and our farmers. So it's an entire chain that exists, in harmony together. So
Right. We will link. We had the pleasure of interviewing Mike Menina as well, so we'll link it to this episode as well. And of course, Michael, if you don't mind, I think that we have tons of different questions, very interesting questions yet to cover. If you don't mind, we'd love to have you back at some point. Before we kind of like close this interview, I would just like to ask you one very brief, quick question. Did you love coffee as much as you probably do now before you started all this? Was coffee even a part of your life?
No, really interesting.
I'm so happy that you said that, because all right.
I wanted to love coffee, but I couldn't find coffee I liked. It was always what I've come to learn now is apparently I was always drinking really dark roasted coffee that was not pleasant. And so I'd kind of given up on coffee. My girlfriend at the time, introduced me to English tea, right? It was black tea with milk and sugar.
Oh, yes. Right.
So I was a tea guy, and I started delving into coffee, and then I started to realize, oh, wait a minute, there are different ways to enjoy coffee, and I got back into it, and then I realized, and so now I love coffee, and I actually also love tea.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, go. No,
funny enough, I think I could have ruined the relationship with with Thrive 2 years ago when Enrique and I went to meet Mike at your offices, and he made the coffee from scratch and weighed the water and did everything. And I committed the mortal sin of asking for milk and sugar. So
Yeah.
I don't quite know if he's ever forgiven me for that.
You know what we say is enjoy it the way you like it.
Exactly.
And I drink coffee black almost all the time now, but there are times where I enjoy, if it's a little darker roast, I still enjoy some cream and a little sugar in it. So
there you go. All right.
Yeah.
I feel
Enjoy it any way you like it. That's the thing.
I'm taking the shame away from you. You're free now.
Thank you for sharing it with me.
2 years kind of carrying that burden, Adrian.
Yeah, exactly. I feel freer now.
Michael, thank you so much. Again, this has been an incredibly engaging conversation with you. What you've done is inspirational and inspired a lot of people to kind of start acting in more purpose mentality. And so thank you so much for participating. For everyone else that listens to this episode, if you like interesting conversations like the one that we just had with Michael, please don't hesitate to join us. Please hit subscribe, and thank you very much. We'll see you again on another episode of Logistics with Purpose. This is Enrique Alvarez and Adrian Purtill. Have a good day, and thank you once again for listening.